Welcome to our continuing series of virtual voices, hosted by World Information Transfer and focusing on the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Today, our presenter is Jonscott Turco, who over 2 decades has been a pioneer in transformative change for global enterprises, steering them through shifting markets with his expertise. As founder and CEO of HumINX, he revolutionizes organizational ability, enabling clients to confidently adapt and thrive. His experience as a management consultant and executive has equipped him with a unique understanding of the interplay between technology, behavior, and culture. His leadership enhances them and enhances the team performance and drives transformative outcomes by fostering vibrant cultures and strong leadership. He has led numerous international consulting initiatives, devising inclusive strategies and technological innovations across over 50 countries. Over to you, Mr. Turco.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate your opportunity. Dr. Durbek, thank you so much for the team here. And I'm excited to speak to you today about embracing cultural diversities for success and impact across borders. And before I get into this, I'm going to set the stage just a bit with a story or two, if you would indulge me. And impact and success are subjective or objective terms, right? Where we have these benchmarks that we put in for ourselves. And I think before we get there, we have to look at perspective versus observing versus perceiving. So this is a critical component I'd like to start with so that you could have a little bit of framework. So observing is static. This is a white coffee mug. Perceiving is that this might not be big enough for you based on your morning or the night you had before. So how you put this through your filters and perceptions often cloud how we see things in the world. And this comes into great play when it comes to dealing with international cultures and cross-cultural work. And this has been my hallmark for obviously a number of years. The story I'd like to start with is an interplay between media, technology, and first-person experiences. And it kind of came to mind as I was putting this conversation together. Several years ago, a friend of mine asked me, do I think I have a better perspective on the world than they did? And I answered very quickly, yes. And she said, oh, that quickly? And I thought for a second, how can I explain why I felt so firmly about this? And I said, well, you would call me looking at your computer, looking at the weather report in Paris and saying, oh, it's a sunny day in Paris. And I will answer the phone call that you made to tell me this in the pouring rain, standing on the Champs-Élysées. And you would argue with me because you're reading this online that you're correct and I am incorrect. So it brings me to this concept of first-person experiences. And when it comes to cultural awareness and cultural agility for people and organizations, first person is obviously the very best way of experiencing something because you have your hands, your feet, your brain, your ears, your eyes in a setting and in a situation far more personal and far more actual than simply a internet article or a TikTok video or something that you're seeing. And if you put the faith of your understanding of a culture, of a people, of a way of living, a way of working, in what you see in one two-dimensional media, it's going to be biased by whatever media you see. So unless you have a curiosity to seek out a wide array of media sources, in addition to your first-person experiences, I think you're going to have a compromised perspective. So going back to how cross-cultural awareness is going to increase your success and impact, it brings me to a few different key points. And there's tons of data points for this. We can talk about gender, we can talk about ethnicity, we can talk about cultural diversity, and the impacts are very direct. The simplest I can tell you is And there's tons of places, and I'll pull up some media reports about this as well. When we look at racial and ethnic diversity in organizations, a report by McKinsey highlights that 35% more likely to have financial returns, outpacing their competitors if you have a high degree of racial and ethnic diversity in your organization. Something that shouldn't be surprising. When it comes to female leadership, organizations with female CEOs have a 15% head start on profitability compared to their counterparts. And there's countless data points about this. These data points from McKinsey and Deloitte and other things are very simple and actual to see, and they're based on their surveys and their clients. When it comes to us as human beings, it is also interesting to see how we can change our perspective and how our perspectives grow. I'll give you another short story. My two children are in their late 20s, and when they went to university, when they were looking at the university they were going to, they grew up in the New York City area, metro area. I drew a 6-hour driving line with around New York City. And I said, pick a school outside of this line. Now, I love my kids dearly. I was not excited not to see them. I wanted them to have a bit of a different experience in the country with students from other places as compared to going to universities where all of their high school and friends and local people would be going to. So I thought that that would broaden their perspective and experience. And it did. Similarly, when we talk about social interaction and the ability to understand and listen to people from other cultures and other ways of life, it brings me to a simple fact where I've only encountered in all of my years and all of the countries I've worked at and visited, two kinds of people, irrespective of gender, race, religion, anything else. And those two kinds of people are very simply open and closed. And you can tell these people very simply when you encounter them. And you can tell this behavior for yourself as well. If you hear someone say to you, I've never heard of that before, that's new to me, I've never seen that before, or if you find yourself having these similar statements or feelings, pay attention to how you engage or how they engage with you. And I'll be a bit dramatic for the purpose of this conversation. If I lean in and say, I've never heard of that before, it's a visual body behavior clue that I'm curious and I want to learn. If I say, or you see yourself or someone reacting to you, I've never heard that before. I mean, obviously overly dramatic. They're much more suspect because you're questioning their worldview or something they hold to be simply true in their mind, and they don't want to learn other pieces of it. This is certainly a movable line for most of us, right? We start out typically with things we're comfortable with and familiar with. And then how can we expand this over time when we understand that our experiences in life, education, and otherwise are much richer and much more diverse the more people and interactions we have in a global sense with diverse opinions. So for me, I seek out diverse opinions and perspectives because I know based on my experiences, both in the boardrooms and working with organizations, as well as being a professor, as adjunct professor for the last 28 years, this is a critical differentiator in learning and in synthesizing information from around the world. So we look at these behavioral factors. How can we create impact? How can we understand that it's not just its arbitrary word success and what that means? My work centers around impact, and it's the first question I ask every one of my clients. What do you want the end result to be? What is your ultimate impact and goal you're looking to achieve? So when you start with this in mind and you back it down, you can see that cultural diversity and cultural curiosity and flexibility is going to be a critical component for almost every level of success within organizations, no matter if they're single country, multinational, enormous organizations, small organizations. And I'll share a story with you from many years ago. Working with one of my clients, it was about 1,000 people in the audience. We were there for 5 days, and it was an innovation summit. And I got to design work teams of 3 people, and they had 6 months to create new ideas for the organization. And the cross-cultural work was fascinating. This was like I was a science experiment for me because I chose an engineer from Japan to work with a marketing person from Brazil and a financial person from New York City. And they had to overcome cultural differences, language differences, behavioral and specialty differences in what they were working on to get together to create and innovate. So we had several of these groups of 3 people, if you can imagine, putting together an innovation proposal and submitting those to their organization. It was a fascinating and fantastic group. What I found over the years is that many of these trios kept in touch. Many of these trios got to know each other personally beyond the office and say, it might be interesting for you to come to work in Japan. It might be interesting for the organization to have people move around and to see other perspectives and other ways of working. It also leads me to the reality that I put together training programs for my organizations when I first started my career after graduate school. And if you can imagine hiring MBAs out of Harvard and Stanford and other schools of the ilk, telling them that their training program includes 3 months in the factory picking products off a line, and then 3 months in the field in a random part of the United States where they were working in Minnesota in the winter, visiting drugstores, helping stock shelves. I was working for a cosmetics company back then. It wasn't the easiest sell for leadership nor for the new hires. However, I'm confident that that program had a much better result of a well-rounded, more informed leaders than if they just went straight from HBS or wherever into the executive functions. So I think that this cultural diversity takes on many different phases, many different aspects, and it goes to keeping curious. If any of you have seen the TV show Ted Lasso, there's a famous situation there where it's a dart thing. I encourage you to look it up if you haven't seen it, but it says, be curious, not judgmental. It's actually, I think, a Emerson quote. And I think most of us, and myself included, have to fight the urge to perceive and not observe. We put things through this massive filter. And for some of us that are older, we have this way of working that works for us. We kind of see the path. We know the path. We can kind of say 1, 2, 3, 4. We know it's going to end in 10. And we don't see the peripheral. So I encourage you to take a look at the periphery, to look around and see, how can I be more open? How can I create impact and see things in the world through other perspectives? Put yourself in their seat. If you're going to try to perceive the world based on the things that you see and understand, maybe shift that perspective and try to put yourself in someone else's seat. How are they perceiving this? How are they perceiving you? How are you as a professional being perceived in your efforts and communication style? I remember my first business trip ever. I arrived there and I found it very odd that the person I met said, "Oh, I thought you were Black." And I said, "Okay." This predates video calls, everyone. It predates cell phones and it predates the internet, to be honest with you. So I just thought that was an odd observation to share with me at that moment. And I kind of shrugged it off and thought that was interesting to share with me. But what difference did that make in the communication? Like, how did that set that up? Oh, you're from America. I get on stages around the world. I say, good morning. And they say, oh, you're American. And depending on what America is doing at that moment, I may have some impassioned feedback about my country from people in Taiwan or Singapore or Australia or anywhere in Europe or in South America or in Africa. So it is interesting to get perspective from other people and how it impacts how we work and live each day. I think when it comes to these points, I would encourage you to be open and not closed, to be curious about how things are being done elsewhere, how other ways of approaching a problem or a solution can enhance your thought process, not just in that moment, but in how you approach and solve solutions for your life and in my case, for clients. How can I get a new perspective, something that I lean into because I've never heard of that before? I never thought of that perspective. That's fascinating. I'd love to learn more about that. I encourage you to stay curious. And I think this is true for many of us in the sense that the longer you work, the longer you live, if you're graced with the privilege and pleasure of living a long life, you have collected more experiences. And it's much more regular for us to say, okay, I kind of know how the story is going to go. And I challenge all of us to stay curious and to listen. I tend to define listening in all of my work when I stand up first in front of groups of executives. And the way that I choose to define listening is not knowing what you're going to say until the person finishes speaking and you can process what they said. If you have your hand up in a meeting and you're basically literally waiting to speak, you have stopped listening. We've been there. I've been there. Where you're kind of replaying, don't forget the question, don't forget the point you want to bring up. You've already stopped. They could be sharing amazing information with you at that moment. And all you're doing in your head is waiting to speak. So the cultural diversity, the curiosity about how things are done elsewhere, it's very, very fascinating to be able to embrace this as part of your regular way of working, studying, and being. And, again, I'm thinking about examples that I always kind of confound me, but I tend to travel quite a bit. And it's a great joy and passion of mine to be, I find the airport a calming place most of the time. Stuck in Dubai last week for 21 hours waiting to get out of there after the floods, not as calming. But in general, I find the airport a fascinating and calming place to me because I know I'm going to encounter new people, new experiences, new places sometimes, and new ways of interacting with people and just observing the people around you. So I encourage you to listen, to have open ears, open eyes, and at the risk of sounding too sentimental, have an open heart for how things are being approached. I think that we have this way of being as human beings where we tend to kind of, see a path and say, I understand exactly how that's going to go. As an organization, they tend to have a way of being. We like people who do this. We like people from this school. We like people who think this way. And if I can ask you to, if you're students or if you're new in your career as well, if you look at it this way, when I was hiring marketing executives, let's just say early in my career, the path at that time was to hire someone who had a marketing undergraduate degree, who had a marketing focused MBA, and who had interned in marketing capacities. Fine. And I thought to myself, well, wouldn't it be interesting to hire someone with a history undergrad degree and maybe an MBA in finance who interned in marketing and who chose marketing as the path they want to follow because they'd bring a much more, I think, a well-rounded perspective into things as opposed to straight through marketing. Now, if you're a marketing MBA student and had a marketing undergrad, it doesn't mean you're out of luck. It just means think about the experiences and how you pursue knowledge, where you pursue it from, and how that can play into your future. Because I think any employer, particularly the way things are going from a technological perspective, is going to look for someone who has a broad series of skills and perspectives and ways of impacting organizations. I firmly believe, after working across the world as long as I have and am, that a global perspective is more and more essential for being able to contribute the most you can contribute as any type of worker or just honestly human being in the world. The perspectives that you can glean by being curious, by saying, I wonder what the perspective on this is in Indonesia, in China, in France, in Germany, in South Africa, in the Congo, whatever it is. You can easily, I mean, this is one of the things I find most amazing about the younger generations, that they have literal access to any information in the entire planet in their hand, literally. And what do I see? Most of my friends and some of my students, they're fixated on TikTok on the same, same two apps, the same algorithms that you're programming by your behaviors. And they stop as a matter of course being curious. So what's the story in this country? What's the perspective here? How, if you look at uh, resilience and you look at overcoming setbacks, how can this play into your curiosity for cultural diversity? Because again, if you don't know the outcomes, if you're unsure about how this is going to go, I challenge you to see this as exciting. I challenge you to see the unknown and the uncertainty of curiosity and of learning something new from someone you maybe didn't think you would learn from. Have that be a hallmark of your behavior as a person, as a leader, as a student, whatever it is, because your life and your work will be so much richer if you do that. Uh, Try to be open to the fact that not just, I'm looking at some stats, you know, Harvard Business School put together something where it's I think it's two-thirds higher chance for organizational success if you have a diverse organizational leadership, if you have men and women and different religions, different cultures leading an organization, because frankly, the world has shrunk to such a remarkable degree, and it's only getting smaller. I can imagine on this call and on most of the calls that you host, there are people from many different countries, many different walks of life, different levels of their career, different levels of curiosity as to the topic and how it could impact them. Because we do all realize that we listen to information and put it through our own filters. How is this going to impact me? How can it benefit me? How can I benefit from this knowledge and how I want to change the world? And I think it leads me to this, and I'll kind of touch on this point. I take my clients through 7 pillars of how they can examine their work, their culture and leadership, and their life. And their 7 pillars are as follows: positivity, authenticity, courage, action, joy, gratitude, and resilience. And if you think about that arc and think about how you approach your work, your studies, your life, when you look at the curiosity I implore you to have when it comes to cultural diversity and how it can impact your life and the places you work and the people you encounter and where you go in your life, I would encourage you to look at these 7. I'll say them again. Approach each day with positivity. Your attitude and how you set your day is going to be critical. Be authentic. Pretending only goes so far. And it's exhausting. I work with leaders for the last 25 plus years. If you're not who you are, and there's tons of metrics and assessments that we put people through over the years that highlight this, be authentic. Deal with the discomfort rather than the resentment, as Brene Brown says, of pretending to be someone that you're not in those moments. So positivity, authenticity leads me to my 2 favorite that I tend to put in all capitals: courage and action. It's very easy to do what everyone's done. It's very easy to say, that's how it's been done. And there's a well-worn path. And why would I deviate from that path? Whether it be culturally, organizationally, behaviorally, travel-wise, work-wise. So courage, having the courage to even dream about doing something that is out of the usual path. And courage without the next action is useless, right? It just becomes talk. Taking action is the single most important piece of this, because otherwise everything is just theory, right? So action is the next. And then if we look at courage, I have to read this over in my head now. Positivity, authenticity, courage, action, joy, which is usually the one that stumps most of my clients. You should be engaged and excited about what you're doing and what you're working on, because it leads to gratitude, which is the next. And then leads to, finally, when you have this base, when you have this foundation, when things go wrong, having the resilience to get up and try again. And I think that I use this term specifically. I chase failure. I chase failure in my running, in my exercise, in my thought, because I want to get to the point where it's unsolvable and I have to find a new way to solve it. Because I think that exercise benefits us as human beings. It benefits us as whatever profession you wish to pursue. So finding a path that is unsure, that is your best guess, that is driven by curiosity and an educated guess at that, is far better and far more likely to pay dividends for you than doing the same thing that's always been done and expecting to have different results, right? It's the definition of insanity. I think it's Einstein. So I'd leave you on that. I encourage questions. I think that we have our moderator who's joined us now. And any questions from the group, I'm happy to take.
Well, thank you very, very much for a very interesting and informative presentation. I mean, your approach of helping professionals go and study with different cultures is particularly very, very important, because it basically helps expand our shrinking global environment. turning over to our moderator, Susie. Susie.
Thank you, Dr. Durbach, and thank you, Jonscott.
Thank you.
We have some questions from the audience inspired by a lot of the wisdom you've shared. So without further ado, what skills do you think are most important for success in today's world?
Wow, that's a big question, huh? I think if I'm speaking in a broad sense, I think curiosity and intellectual humility. I think that's an intersection of which I encourage you to play in the intersection of that Venn diagram. Being curious and having the foundation of your understanding and knowledge about what you want for your own life and what you want for the world in terms of how you wish to impact and change the world. And also understanding no matter how old you get or how much we've worked or what kind of expertise or accolades we accumulate, having a great degree of intellectual humility is a critical component. People ask me all the time, what's the most important thing with clients and leaders that I work with? And I thought about this for a while, and I'll stick to this as my answer. The ability for someone to say, I don't know, let's find the solution together. The ability of a leader, and this becomes rarer and rarer the higher up you go to the N-1s and to the senior most people. The ability to say, I don't know, is a critical component. So admitting that and owning that yourself, I think that's a piece I would say.
Thank you. And being in consulting where oftentimes or historically you were looked to as kind of an expert in things, like how did you balance that with the intellectual humility and kind of admit when you were unsure?
I think it's a great question, Susie. I think asking questions and helping my clients find the answers or find a good way down the path to what they wish. Because oftentimes when I ask a client what the end result they're looking for, they're not sure. You know, I mean, it's very easy to say, you know, bottom line, EBITDA, whatever, you know, that's a simple answer. But I work with teams and leaders who want to impact culture and behavior as a means to impacting results. So I think the ability for that is something important, I would say. Yeah.
And what skills and qualities do you think are essential for leaders in today's environment? Are they similar to what you just mentioned, or what forms an impactful leader in today's environment?
So I'll speak about today as a non-static point because today is moving so fast that if you set a goal and put a pin in this day and May 1st of 2024 as your goal, I think you'll be left behind. I think the ability to anticipate multiple avenues of change and to hire people smarter than you to address these separate points. I think the old model was that leaders and C-suite executives particularly are supposed to be omnipotent. You know, no matter what question you ask them, they have an answer for you. And I think that's to their detriment, to the detriment of their organizations, to the detriment of the world at large, because oftentimes the information that's coming is so fast and so unpredictable that I frankly see the COVID crisis as an interesting inflection point in this, because no one had any idea what to do. You know, I was on a call not unlike this with a leader in April, 4 years ago, almost 4 years ago, April of 2020. And he said to me, he leaned in, he goes, I need everybody back in the office by May 1st. And I leaned in even closer. I said, not happening. And I said, this is a great opportunity to ask people, like, listen, I don't know what to do. Like, what ideas do you have? I mean, I think when you've encountered empowering leaders, I'll ask this to all of you to think amongst yourselves. When you've encountered empowering leaders to say, listen, this is what we're trying to do. I'd love to hear your ideas. Wow, isn't that amazing that, you know, they're letting me have an opinion about this. They're letting me find a different solution. And oddly enough, the same leader who leaned in and said he wants everybody in the office May 1st, he wasn't happy at some point with his, you know, number two, because he didn't like the way that he was going about his job. And I said, well, are his KPIs well? Like, it looks like things are going well. He said, I just don't like the way they're doing it. And I said, because you wouldn't do it that way, or because of its effect and results? And it caused him to stop and say, oh yeah, I have my way I would do this. And I think that leaders who are open, right? Again, here's the open versus closed. Leaders who are open to new ways of working, new ways of solving problems, like that's where innovation comes from, right? So I work a lot with innovation and agility as leaders and organizations. And I think having a degree of cultural agility is critical. I think having a degree of behavioral agility is key. And again, it goes back to that question, which is, I don't know, let's solve this together.
Yeah, for sharing. And is there a project that you worked on that was either most impactful to you as a learning experience, or you feel most proud of, that you don't mind sharing?
Oh, it's funny. Until the last part of that question, I had a couple of ideas. I think from a learning experience, this isn't to your question, but forgive me the indulgence of speaking about this. So I was working with a pharmaceutical company years ago, and on a break, I was sitting with the head of that division, and they were working to cure or solve problems in a specific disease. So I posed a question which I thought was fairly simple, which I said, hey, I have a question. You just spoke about how you're spending X, gajillion dollars on research and development. Let's just say your phone rings right now, and it's your head of R&D, and they say, hey, we've just cured whatever. We figured it out. And the response I received and witnessed was, oh my gosh, that would be terrible. My shareholders would freak out, the board would freak out. And I said to myself, this is the learning experience part of your question. I was like, wow, I can't work with you anymore because my work is performative, right? At this point, if you're committed to this reaction, if the best case scenario comes where you just spent days telling your teams, then I can't do this because that seems wrong to me. So that was my last work. So from a learning experience, that was a learning experience for me. Right. So I think you have to ask yourself, no matter what level of career you're in, what am I willing to do? And what standards are you willing to learn more about, compromise if you don't feel good about it? Because that's a critical test for you, not for anybody else, for you. Like, what are you about? And when it comes to cultural diversity, and I hear this all the time, I hear misperceptions constantly, daily, literally daily. I hear it all the time. Oh, I heard that. I hear that I'm in Dubai a lot, and I love Dubai. And I hear this all the time, like, oh, I heard in Dubai there's people can't have alcohol, and that women are totally covered. I'm like, you've clearly never been to Dubai. So my daughter works for American Express, and she was sitting around having this conversation, and someone said to her similarly, I heard this or that and this, and my daughter's like, no, I've been there many times, and that's absolutely not true. And in that moment, it goes back to my first point, right? Her first person experience was what solved that curiosity and that incorrect information. However, if it just was allowed to marinate, if no one had had that first person experience, someone may have left that discussion saying, oh, well, I guess can't do this in that place. So it goes back also to diversity, because I can tell you first person, I told clients this, some of my US clients, and they said, that's not true. And I said, I'm telling you a fact I know based on my direct work. So it is true. I've witnessed it. It's happening. The diversity of leaders in several of the places I work in the Middle East far exceeds that in Europe and America in terms of inclusivity at the female levels of the highest levels of organizations. Fact. Okay. Is it true for everywhere, every organization? No. But is it surprising and to the point where people say I'm wrong? I love to hear that. That's like, no, it's actually a fact I witnessed first person. So I think these are important things to consider.
Thank you for sharing. And my family's actually from Lebanon, so I have a lot of relatives and friends in Dubai too, and attended COP. Were you at the UN Climate Change
I
Conference?
wasn't. I was actually on another project. Yeah. But
Nice. And
on my screen, the person next to you is also Lebanese descent in Dubai right now, because I can see Lara
great to
on her
meet you, Lara.
side. Um,
Uh, yeah, so there's an influx of Lebanese that have moved to Dubai because, to your point, it's kind of become this haven of inclusivity and innovation and business. And so it's a great opportunity for people in the region to kind of build a life and career there. Do you have any reactions or thoughts coming out of the climate change conference that you'd like to share with us?
I have to admit, I mean, I've read some of the reports. I don't really have as informed an opinion as I would feel comfortable sharing. I do think that my work with technology and specifically in artificial intelligence, some of the large language learning models that I think are coming through are going to make a significant impact on the carbon footprint of organizations and countries. I think the degree to which, and I'll say this as I sit to you here in the United States, the degree to which we can overcome some of the institutional bias and to be candid, greed, as it blocks some of the development and human necessity to change our behaviors as a species. This is the larger conversation. I encounter the pushback all the time. I encounter the pushback oftentimes when I ask, before we got on the call, I was mentioning to Dr. Durbeck, I said, part of this is, being able to tell people, no, like I get paid to tell the truth. Enough organizations have enough yes people in the organizations that they don't need to hire someone else to be a yes person, right? I see my role as taking in all the facts, understanding what the goal is, and then giving them my honest assessment based on all of this and my experience. So I think it's an important opportunity to say, let's take a moment and realize what we're doing is not.
Teraz jaskrakowa picture.
You can go.
Thank you. You mentioned the importance of positivity and authenticity. How do you kind of foster a culture of positivity and authenticity among your teams?
Great question. I wish I had a simple formula and algorithm because we'd all retire and it'd be very effective. I think it starts at the top from a mindset and behavior. So that's why I always say the most important thing a leader can say is, I don't know, right? So challenges are going to present themselves outside the scope of experience that someone has dealt with in a leadership position. It's a given. The world, business, technology, cultural change, everything is moving so fast that if you don't keep up, your ways of working are so antiquated so quickly that I believe that's a critical piece. So positivity is, as I see it, is understanding this fact, right? Not begrudging change, but embracing it. Like if something's running fast, you can run along and try to jump on or get ahead of it, or you can watch it go. So my goal is to make sure that we're helping set the pace, we're helping harness the power of change and innovation. And it leads me to one of the core tenets of this talk, which is cultural diversity for success and impact. I'd much rather have a culturally, racially, aged, differentiated team, because now we have this opportunity to learn from multi-generations, from multi-perspectives, from multi ways of perceiving the world, right? Because it does fall to all of us to put things through our own unique filters. So as leaders and how we're going to remain positive, it's understanding that things are going to change. We can listen, we can bitch and moan about it all the time, but it's happening, right? So I remember asking clients after COVID, they were surveying their teams. And I said, why? And they said, well, we want to see if they want to work from home or I said, do you plan on taking this information and having it factor into your decision? Because if the answer is no, don't survey your teams. Some clients listened, some didn't listen. Some got 95% wanted it fully remote, and they had people in the office 5 days a week. They lost 40% of their staff in the first 3 months of this policy. But I think that sometimes experience is slow to be a teacher for many people. So I think positivity is a mindset. If you wake up every day and you think today can be a great day, I'm going to do everything I can to make it whatever qualifies as great for you, I think you have a far better chance than waking up and begrudging the sun because it rose. I think that's an honest piece. Authenticity is tougher, right? Because Authenticity is questioning authority sometimes. Authenticity is questioning your own preconceived ideas about yourself and looking at things. I'd like to give you this own little piece of information. I love the term best worst thing. So I encourage you to put this through your own filters. The way that I choose to interpret this, based on what I've learned, is what has happened to you in your life previously that at the time seemed so devastating and that rocked you to your core. You couldn't see a way through it, but here you are through it. And if you had the opportunity to go back to that point, that inflection point, and redo it, you would choose not to because of how you've grown and evolved as a person. I have my own best worst things. Hopefully you have your own best worst things. And you use that to inform this positivity and authenticity, saying, okay, well, you know what? I've been there. I've been knocked down. I can get up again. I can figure this out. I can learn and keep growing and adapting yourself. So you become more open. You listen to more ways of working, ways of living, and you use these to inform a better decision, working, living, studying, however you wish to impact the world from an authentic place, because that's the only way the world's going to change, right? If we're all doing things because we think that's what you want me to do, or that's what you want me to do, or that's what you want me to do, and I lose track of my own moral compass, even if you make mistakes, even if you make big mistakes, sorry, great, move on, right? Your ability to forget and go forward is really going to be a hallmark of your success as a person, not just as a professional. You have to be able to learn the lessons and keep going and get up the next day and keep going forward.
Your point around cultural diversity sparked a lot of questions from the audience. So
Sure.
how do you address the challenges posed by cultural differences and cross-border collaborations and foster an environment where diverse cultures can work together and contribute to success?
I think, again, that's a 6-hour webinar just to start, right? So I think it depends on the organization's appetite for change. And I've worked with many organizations that are growing at a decent rate and they're happy with it. And they don't want to rock the boat. I think this is the intrinsic problem I face in my work, okay? As people get higher up in the organizations, they consequently get closer to retirement, right? People making decisions, this is not just true in business, by the way, are much older. And they have an exit ramp closer than if someone is just graduating university or business school or graduate school of some type. The decisions they make are probably a big compromise based on that short window. So if I'm a CEO and my share price is X, and I know that trying something new could dip the share price down and take years to recover from, perhaps to the betterment of the company and the world, I may not be so quick to take that decision because it's going to impact my retirement in 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, 1 year, whatever. So this is a fundamental challenge I run into, where leaders will look at me, and I know, part of the benefit of working as long as I have is I know what you're thinking before you say it sometimes. And I'm sure Dr. Turbeck has this with her clients as well. Like, I'm waiting for them to say what I know, they know, I know, they know, if that makes sense. I'm like, just say it, because I know what I know you want to say it. So I do think that this is a fundamental challenge. I think having a more culturally diverse team, both in terms of, gender, age, experience, geography, nationality, perspectives, is only going to be better. It's only going to help, leaders be engaged. Because if you feel like your leaders have lost touch because they have a town hall twice a year and they just tell you what they think and they don't want to hear feedback, then maybe you're right. If you have a way of working that I want this company on my resume, and you're going to do whatever you can just because you want to have Google on your resume, then and not that Google's a company that doesn't evolve and change. Obviously they are in many ways. So I do think that it's an interesting challenge. There's no simple answer for it. I think it depends on leaders. It's evolving very fast. And I think that it shouldn't compromise you. And I'll say the same thing I tell my kids, frankly, and my students, because I have, 28 almost years of former students at this point. And You have to decide what kind of person you want to be in the world. You have to decide what kind of impact you want to have and pursue things that are going to make that reality more likely. Because if you wait for it to be handed to you or offered to you, it's not going to happen. It's, I think it comes down to courage and action, right? Again, it comes down to saying, I'm going to make that phone call. I'm going to reach out and call this person. I'm going to follow up and say, hey, we haven't spoken in a while, but Gary Vee had something funny years ago. I think it was Gary Vee, where he had this habit of saying, go back like 10 years in your emails to an email you didn't respond to and respond to it like it just came in. And then see the conversation it sparks. And I actually tried it a couple of times. It was pretty fascinating. And I still keep in touch with some people who I lost touch with for quite a while. But, engaging and trying different things in different ways. And I guess the reality is, like, what's the worst thing that can happen? You get a no, you learn something. I think reframing setbacks and failures as learning is a fundamental requirement for happiness and success as a person going forward. Because you have to, and this is why I say I chase failure, because if you don't test yourself, if you don't stretch yourself, this is true, whether it be like in my yoga practice or in real life, if you don't push yourself, you're never going to grow, right? So I want my students, my kids, people I work with, I want them to always be in a state of growth. And growth is tough, and growth is sometimes painful, and growth sometimes leads to failure, but it's all growth. I think it's an important thing to consider when you're considering your own decisions.
We have another loaded question, which would probably warrant a 6-hour webinar, but any thoughts around, as we look ahead, what emerging trends or technologies do you believe have the most impact on organizational agility and transformative change?
Yeah, it is. That's a 5-day seminar somewhere. It's simply put, I think it's two things. I think artificial intelligence and how it's harnessed is going to be critical. I've seen statistics now. Some people are saying, like, within the next generation, 300 million jobs are going to be replaced with artificial intelligence. And the reality of the matter is, whenever people panic about this, I always say, who I really feel bad for? The blacksmiths. I mean, these guys, they were making horseshoes, and then, like, what are they doing now? Are they just waiting around for horses to come around? Like, you have to adapt skills. You have to adapt your learning. You have to, find ways of harnessing. I mean, I spent an enormous amount of time helping my clients with prompt engineering because it's fascinating when you ask the right questions. It's true in life in general, isn't it? Like, if you ask things the right way and you're specific about it, you get better answers. So I think AI is going to be, and it is already revolutionizing a lot of the ways people work. It's also going to challenge leaders, because I think if it comes down to that, I keep going back to the same things, right? Which I guess is good. It's open or closed. I remember on my university, one of the campuses I teach at, people were they want to ban ChatGPT. And I was like, well, you can't ban it. Like, it's everywhere. And one of the professors, who was one of the loudest voices, who was one of the oldest people in the room, and I'll get to the punchline in just a moment, I was a student of his when I was an undergrad. And when I was finishing graduate school and started teaching, I said, well, Joe, I'll call him Joe. I said, Joe, you said the same thing about the internet in 1994. And the whole people who were there who remembered laughed. And I think it's a reflex, right? To, like, say, it's new. I'm not comfortable with it. It goes back to the same thing, right? Change is tough. Change is going to be painful. Are there going to be adaptations? Absolutely. Is the school of the future, whatever school means to you, going to be different? I sure hope so. I remember when I was a student 100 years ago, we weren't allowed to have calculators because we were told we're not going to walk around with calculators. I don't have my Apple Watch on, but it's nearby. So how is learning going to change? It's changing curriculum. It's changing how we interact with one another. It's changing how businesses behave. It's changing what business means. My brother worked for a company years ago called Everything, and they had QR codes on every item of a company's product. Puma, I think Ralph Lauren was a client, and you can scan a QR code on your shirt and see where it was made, how it was sourced. The sustainability comes into effect. It eliminates the gray market. It highlights things that are going a little fishy. We ordered 1 million QR codes, but why are there 2 million? Why are there 1.6 million shirts? Like, where are they going? They're all labeled with my brand. They're not stuff I ordered. Where are they going? So it's changing how people conduct business. It's changing how people work. I'm a big fan of face-to-face conversations and first-person experiences, obviously. And that's getting more challenging. And sometimes it's inconvenient. If we were having everyone in this call meet in New York or meet in a different part of the world, it'd be a far more complicated endeavor than having a webinar, right? However, if I have a chance to speak face-to-face with Dr. Durbek or with you, Susie, or my friend Lara in Dubai, or whoever else is here, I would rather have that opportunity if given the opportunity to do so. So I think that it's going to change everything. I think so. To your answer, AI, absolutely. And the ability and the interest people have to work cross-culturally. I would love to see students of mine graduate from university in New York or Paris or Dubai and say, you know what, I'm going to go to wherever for 6 months. I'm going to go see what it's like to work in Vienna. I think I want to go to Bogota. I want to go to Singapore. And for what reason? Like, why are you going to go there? Well, because it's a different perspective. I'm in a hotel, it's pet friendly. So if you hear a dog barking, it's actually a dog barking down the hall. So I think that that's an important piece, is like having that curiosity, having that cross-cultural curiosity. I think that is going to be a driver of impact for our world, like almost nothing else other than technology. Having a generation or leaders say, you know what, I want to go see what it's like over there. I want to see the perspective that South Africans have about my business. I have a subsidiary there. I'm going to go work in there. I'm going to go work wherever it is. I'm going to, even within the United States. I mean, I grew up in New York City. Kansas is a different part of the country. So is California. So are other big cities. The perception that we have of the world and our work in one place is far different. We see this in all walks of life, politics, business, relationships, whatever it is. So I think that those are significant impact. I think, technology and intellectual curiosity as it comes to global cross-cultural work.
Thank you. How did you become comfortable with failure? You mentioned the importance of kind of chasing experiences that bring you out of your comfort zone and where you could potentially fail, but failure is often an intimidating thing for people and discourages them from chasing their dreams. So how did you kind of navigate that?
I wish I could tell you it was like a strategic, very methodical point, but I think, I'll say this, I had an opportunity when I was younger to trust someone and, in my own full admission, like make a decision that I wouldn't make today. It blew up spectacularly for me. So my embracing failure came from being fully invested in where I was in that moment in time and realizing that that's one of my best worst things. The growth and the evolution I had as a person, I realize if that didn't happen, if those decisions I made that I wouldn't make today, that my dad at the time said, get it in writing. And I'm like, oh, we're good. It's not good. So I think that that was something I was unaware of at the time. I didn't see it as this, I'm going to learn a lesson. It was like, oh, well, this is really terrible. And as I go forward in my career, when clients say to me all the time, how do you stay so calm under such incredible pressure and stress? And I look around and go, this isn't incredible pressure and stress. This is just work. Like, these will be solved. These are solvable problems. It's a sign I have at home says everything is figure outable. Because everything is figure outable. I mean, think about the worst times in your life, whatever capacity they were, the worst times. Guess what? You're here still. You're still going. You got through that time. And I think if you just understand that, if you pursue learning and working and living in a way that is courageous, that takes action, you're going to fail. And I see that as a stepping stone towards better and bigger things. So you talked about COP before, like if we didn't look at new technologies and new ways of doing things and new ways of harnessing the earth's power, wind power, solar power, whatever it is that is going to help shift the way things are done and fail, we would never do anything. I mean, I with all the criticism I have, and I have a healthy bit of criticism for Elon Musk, Elon Musk could have retired a very long time ago with a couple of $1 billion from PayPal and just lived along his life and gone about, however he wants to name his kids after what Pythagorean theorem or whatever else he's doing. Like, he could have lived a very fine life, but he was curious to change and to grow and to do other things. So I think and he failed spectacularly. I don't know if you remember the first few SpaceX launches. There were some spectacular failures. And he said himself, Musk, that like if the one that got off didn't go, he was kind of out of money at that point. We were dead. So I think getting to those points of saying, if I try this and it doesn't work, I'm ruined. But then just rethinking, like, what does ruined mean for you? I do think that, to your question, if you have an opportunity, and I hope and pray all of you don't have the opportunity to learn the way I learned, embrace the failure, because it's not that big a deal. If it changes your narrative or the story you tell yourself about yourself, consider it a good thing. Like, I would never want to be the person I was 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. I want to be able to grow and to evolve and to learn as a person, as a professional, as a man, as a human being, as an American, as a world citizen. I love going to places where I don't know anyone. I love going to places where I don't know the culture, where I can just kind of observe. And I will say this, I have kind of a miscellaneous face. In Lebanon, people start speaking to me, they think I'm Lebanese. If I'm in Greece, people think I'm Greek. If I'm in Saudi, people think I'm Saudi. If I'm, listen, I was in Singapore, I'm clearly not Singaporean. But the curiosity is even more so in places like that, where people look at me like, what are you doing here? You don't look like most of the people where you are right now. I love that. I love being in places where I feel uncomfortable because it's new, because it's different for me, because it's odd, because I'm curious. And I think the world, the work world, the education world, and the human world is going to be made much better if people are curious and pursue that curiosity, right? Have the courage to leave where you are, literally, figuratively, mentally, perspective-wise, educationally, professionally, socially. Put yourself in situations that are new, that are different than you're used to. And you all have experiences with this, right? You all have that experience where you were unsure and you went and it was like really positive. And guess what? You have experiences where you were unsure, you went and it was terrible. Congratulations, you're a full human being. So don't let the latter, compromise your ability and curiosity to follow through and learn.
Really inspiring. Thank you for sharing. Is there a class that you took or maybe a book you've read that really helped you grow as a professional and leader?
I really love the Stoics. So Ryan Halliday's books are incredible. The obstacle is the way. I like, if we want to go to the origin, Marcus Aurelius' Reflections. I mean, it's kind of incredible. But I also like books that I think are just inspiring, like hilarious curiosity. Like, I love Bourdain's book, Kitchen Confidential. I think it's crazy. I think it shows a side of something that you see and experience that you just never know. I have so many books. Let me pull. Oh, I love the book Silence by Thich Nhat Hanh. And people say, well, how does that relate to business? Read the book, you'll figure it out. The book is called Silence, the Power of Quiet in a World Full of Noise. And it is an incredible, incredible experience to read. I've probably read it 10 times, literally. And when I think to myself, I need to like slow down and see things, I'm just looking at my books really quick. The Bhagavad Gita, like, I read so many different things, the Surrender Experiment, Mastery, the Practice of Groundedness. I mean, so I love to read books on varying perspectives. And I also look outside of the traditional business books, because I do think that a business book is kind of it's a perspective expanded, right? So it's one way or a series of ways of thinking, which I can certainly learn from. And I like to color that with books like Silence, or books, that are not necessarily specifically action business oriented, because I think it adds a much richer perspective. And again, it's from my own curiosity.
Thank you for sharing. And we're at time. So is there any last message you'd like to leave for the audience?
I think, as I said at the beginning, and I'll come back to it, stay curious. Think about the stories you told yourself when you were younger about where you'd be today. And if that's entirely in line, congratulations, and I'm sorry. Because, I think I have a reel I put up, which is, if you know what you're going to be, I think it's I think it's Emerson. Um, it says, if you know what you want to be, a doctor, lawyer, or whatever, then that's what you'll be. And that's your punishment. Not knowing, staying curious, staying open, that is a real way of experiencing the richness of life and of work and of travel and of cross-cultural awareness and of understanding that if you stay open, the world is going to be far, far more interesting for you. Will you get hurt? Will you fail? Yes. Congratulations. You're a person. You'll keep going. You'll keep learning. Stay open, stay curious, and have courage and take action. Action is the key to everything. Otherwise, it's just theory, right? We can sit there and debate this forever. But until you're going to close your computer and go do something, go do it. I have friends who talked about running a marathon for 30 years. I'm like, I'm running in November in New York. They're like, oh, I'll think about it, which means no for the 30th year in a row that I've talked to them about this, so take action, whatever it is. Don't be afraid of failure.
Thank you so much. I'll turn to Dr. Durbach to close out.
Thanks.
Thank you very much, Susie. And that was an absolutely excellent presentation. I was thinking about everything that you mentioned, and I completely confirm with you. The most important thing is to be curious and have a mind that is curious, and then have the courage to try and act. So again, thank you very, very much, and have a very good future. Of course, you will, by your own abilities and your own perception of what the future is, and take good care of yourself.
Thanks so much. Thank you for Dr. Durbach, and thank you everybody for joining. Thanks so much.